Hey, this is Kenny from Kenny's Audiophile Record Reviews. Thank you very much for viewing my channel. For everyone new to my channel, please like and subscribe. That would help me out. Oh, by the way, sorry for the noise up above. That's my ceiling fan, just in case it is a distraction. I apologize. But in this video, I'm going to give you 10, actually it's more than 10. I think it might be 12 or 13. Very underrated albums that I think are very underrated in the vinyl community these days. Doesn't get the hype and praise they deserve, so I thought I'd give them a mention. They're not the most underrated, but I think they're highly underrated for sure. If I were to do the most underrated albums of all time, that would require a lot of thought, and maybe I'll do that someday. But these are underrated nonetheless. Like I said, they're not the most underrated, but they're underappreciated albums, so I thought I'd give them a mention in this video. And I'm going to start with Parliament, The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein. This album came out my freshman year in high school. I think it was 1976 was when this came out. And I said this in many videos. When I was in high school, as far as I'm concerned, this was the album for me. This was an album that I was into, vibing and grooving to. You know, all this beautiful funk music created by George Clinton and his crew. This was just a tremendous album to listen to. It still is to this day. I know a lot of you out there prefer the Mothership Connection. This is another great album, and deservedly so. This is one of the highly rated Parliament albums, but I prefer The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein, 1976, I believe. Underrated album. Doesn't get the hype it deserves, in my opinion. Another great album is a classical album, and I'm probably mispronouncing the conductor's name, Luciano Berio. This is called Symphonia. And I'm not a huge classical music fan. I have a lot of classical albums. I'm not a very knowledgeable classical music fan, but I know it sounds good. And this sounds good. It sounds tremendous. Now, a lot of people might think that this album, in terms of classical album, in terms of the way the voices are integrated into the classical compositions, is a little bit out there, a little bit stretching it. But that's why I like this album. This album features an a cappella singing group called the Swingle Singers. The Swingle Singers were a tremendous a cappella music group formed in 1962, I believe. Here's just a small sample size of some of their albums, and they would like harmonize and sing to classical music, you know, Bach, Beethoven, and jazz. They did an album with the Modern Jazz Quartet, I believe. I think I have it on CD somewhere. But this is a tremendous classical album. Like I said, a lot of you might be too out there. Maybe that's why I like it. This is probably my favorite classical album of all time. Tremendous album. Highly underrated. Doesn't get any notice at all. Another album that's underrated. And his brother had a lot to say. Gil Scott-Heron. His album is called Reflections. With tremendous composition songs on here. Like, he does a version of Grandma's Hands. Is That Jazz is a great song. And B-Movie, he really gets into it in B-Movie. Reflections by Gil Scott-Heron is great. He did an album called Pieces of a Man. I have that on CD somewhere. And that's just as good as this one. It's probably better than this one, but I think this is underrated nonetheless. Whereas Pieces of a Man album, I believe that's the name of the album, might be his best work. But this album, Reflections, is a tremendous album. Like you said, he had a lot to say. He had a lot to say what was going on in the world. He probably sacrificed a lot of fame and a lot of money in the process. But Gil Scott-Heron, props to Gil Scott-Heron. A live album. This is one of my favorite live albums from one of my favorite groups, Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, live at Expo 70. It's a great live album, at least to me, because I'm so much into their music. A lot of band members of, you know, some of these older bands always claim that some of their greatest works was their live performances. And if you're a fan of Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, this is worth a listen. I believe this is on YouTube. Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66 live at Expo 70. Includes like Lanny Hall, their lead singer, Dom Umramao, who was the drummer. He's right here, right there. He went on to be in one of the earlier incarnations of the jazz fusion group Weather Report. Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66 live at Expo 70. Another underrated song with a lot of hits on it. Backed by two of the greatest, one of the greatest songwriters and lyricists of all time, Burt Bacharach and Hal David. The name of this album is Make Way for Dionne Warwick. Yeah, you need to make way for a performance on this one, because this performance is tremendous. I mean, you have songs like House Is Not a Home, They Long to Be Close to You, Reach Out For Me, You'll Never Get to Heaven. What a great album. I'll show you the song listing on this one if you can see it. Highly underrated album and a highly underrated performance by Dionne Warwick. Another album, and she was a member of Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66, their lead vocalist. She's a tremendous vocalist and underrated vocalist. And this is an underrated album. It's called Hello, It's Me, Lanny Hall. I think this came out in somewhere in the mid-60s, I believe. I bought this when I was in high school, but she does a great version of the song Peace in the Valley, Time Will Tell. Banquet is a tremendous song, exclusively for me. And Sweet Jams and Jellies, all great songs on this album. Hello, It's Me by Lanny Hall, former lead singer of Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66. She's married to Herb Alpert. They've been married for, gosh, several decades now, many decades now. I believe they still tour. This band came out with my freshman year in high school with this album. It's called Dr. Buzzard's Original Savannah Band. And he had this tremendous hit called, I'm probably mispronouncing your name, but I'm doing it anyway. Sure Says La Femme is the name of the song. And I couldn't wait to hear that song on the radio when it came on. When I had to drive the school bus to school, and the bus driver had it on a local FM station. When that song came on, I was like hyped up after listening to that song. But it was a tremendous song, just a great album with a lot of great songs, like I said, Sure Says La Femme. Sun Shower is a very nice song. There's a song called Hard Times about a couple struggling to get by. The lead singer is Corey Day. She had a great voice for this type of music, for this album at this time in 1976. Dr. Buzzard's Original Savannah Band is a highly underrated album. Another highly underrated album, I think I mentioned this in perhaps several videos. And this is from a motion picture soundtrack. The movie's called A Man and a Woman. The movie won grand prize at the 1966 Cannes Film Festival. The obvious instrumental song, it is a very famous song. It was at the time and still is, called A Man and a Woman, great instrumental song. The vocals on this version are in French. And they do a vocal version of the song Stronger Than Us, which is just an amazing, great, spectacular song to listen to. It's really, really great song. And they do an instrumental version of that as well. A Man and a Woman. They also had a English language version of the album. But the movie is a great movie, and the album, the original album, just simply tremendous. It's more in the vibe of easy listening music, this album. But it's still a great album to listen to, in my opinion. This is a famous artist and one of the greatest guitar players ever, and a jazz musician, and he went in the pop and R&B realm, and that is George Benson. And this is his album, Gimme the Night, produced by Quincy Jones. This came out in the early 80s. And the song Gimme the Night, great album, great song to vibe and groove to. There's several great songs on this album. You should definitely check it out. Like Star of the Story is a great song. Turn Out the Lamplight is just a sweet, mellow song. It really is. It's one of those songs when you play with the lights down low. George Benson, Gimme the Night, produced by Quincy Jones. See, gets pictures in here. A tremendous record, an underrated record in this vinyl reissue world we live in. This one flew all under the radar. This is by Antonio Carlos Jobim. Antonio Carlos Jobim was on the famous Getz Gilberto album with Joao Gilberto or Stra Gilberto. Stan Getz. This is called Yorubu, and I'm probably mispronouncing the name. But this one I had in high school. I think this came out approximately 1976. And the reason why I like this album is it shows a lot of wear because I had this practically since it came out. Side 2 is mostly classical music. And it's a type of classical music that people who don't like classical music would get into. That's why I like this album so much. He went in a different direction on this album with the classical stuff, and it's tremendous. Side 2, all the classical works. That's some great, I assume, Portuguese vocal songs on this album. They sound tremendous, but the classical works on this album are the ones to focus on, and I believe they're all on side 2. Antonio Carlos Jobim. I've had this record since the 70s, since approximately when it came out. This one is the greatest Stan Getz album of all time as far as I'm concerned. I mentioned this in other videos. This is underrated, so it gets to get in this video. Stan Getz, Focus. To me, this is his greatest work ever, in my opinion. I know a lot of you out there like Getz Gilberto and some of his other work. To me, this is I concluded, when I first bought this record, I think it came out in the early 60s. I bought it sometime in the early 80s. And I concluded, when I listened to this, I was probably in my early 20s. I concluded that this is the greatest Stan Getz album of all time. My opinion hasn't changed. Stan Getz, Focus. It like fuses like elements of classical music, elements of jazz together, and it's done beautifully by composed and arranged by Eddie Sauter, conducted by Hershey K. It's a tremendous album. Stan Getz, Focus, highly underrated. The best Stan Getz album of all time as far as I'm concerned. This one I mentioned in another video on Herb Alpert, and the name of this album, and again, this is a highly underrated album. Its performance is spectacular. This is like in an easy listening mode, to be honest with you. It's called You Smile. The song begins. And there's very few songs on here that I dislike. The one I probably dislike the most is Alone Again Naturally, because I don't even like the original version, to be quite frank with you. All the songs on this record are actually great. His performance on these songs are actually great. He just hits it out the park in terms of hitting the mood, hitting the right notes at the right time, and the song selections are fabulous, other than Alone Again Naturally. There might be a couple of, like Fox Hunt. I don't know if I like that one or not. Maybe I did. But this is a great album. Herb Alpert. He does a version of Last Tango in Paris. And The Last Tango in Paris was a movie. Then Gato Barbieri did a version on this soundtrack album. This is the best version of Last Tango in Paris, the movie soundtrack, in my opinion. But Herb Alpert's is quite good as well. The last album I did a video on, and this is highly underrated. It flies under the radar because it's a far departure from what this artist normally does. And it's Herb Alpert. This is his Sunlight album. This came out, I believe, in 1978. If it didn't come out in 1978, it came out in 1977. I think 1978. I bought this album when it first came out. I was listening to radio commercials about the release of this album, and I was highly anticipating receiving and listening to this album. I was, maybe 17 when this came out. I loved it then, and I love it now. It sounds tremendous on my system, since my system's much better at the age of 63 than 17. Herb Alpert, Sunlight. He sings on this album through this device. It electronically enhances his voice. I think it's called a vocoder or something like that. And the electronic singing on this album is just, it's tremendous to listen to. The song I Thought It Was You, Come Running to Me, Sunlight, all great singing songs for Herbie Hancock, I'm sorry, on this record. And there's this instrumental that's called Good Question. And that's quite good too. I think Tony Williams might play drums on that song. Herbie Hancock, Sunlight, an underrated record. It's not your, your Miles Davis playing Herbie Hancock records. This is like more like electric, funk, maybe elements of jazz fusion, but this is more of a funk, vibe and groove to it, electronic music vibe and groove to it. Herbie Hancock, Sunlight. But those are a few underrated records I have in my collection. There's probably a ton more. I might have to do some videos on like maybe underrated jazz records and break it down by category, but that's just a few. Please, if you have some, please leave them in the comment section below. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to view my videos and all my videos. Please like and subscribe if you're new to my channel. Thank you for viewing. God bless, strong love, and keep the peace worldwide.